Hi, Tony here again with all the remote things, and I've got a great guest today, Bjarte Bogsnes. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Fantastic to have you on all the remote things. And as I normally do, I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to let you tell people about your bio. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name is Bjarte Bogsnes, and I am a finance guy that kind of stumbled into Beyond Budgeting before it was called Beyond Budgeting. And I often quote Douglas Adams because he once said that I might not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I ended up where I needed to be. And I'm saying this because my first management job in a company called Statoil, now called Equinor, Scandinavia's largest company, my first management job was head of the corporate budget department. So I've been heading up more budget processes in my life than I want to be reminded about. I've done a lot of stupid things in my life. Um, but at one point in my career, I was heading up the finance function in a company that Statoil partly owned, Borealis, Europe's largest petrochemicals company at the time. And this company started operations back in 1995. And through some coincidences, we got the chance to kick out the budget in that company. Again, before there was anything called beyond budgeting, and that worked wonderful. Cost came down, performance improved. Um, After a few years, I moved from finance to human resources, heading up HR in the same company, which was a wake-up call for me when it comes to the people side and leadership side of beyond budgeting. And a few years later, I returned back to Statoil, and now we talk 2005, and got an opportunity to do the same in that company. And since then, I have been working full time on beyond budgeting, more and more externally, conferences, keynotes, workshops, and so on. And last year, I took a difficult, but in hindsight, the right decision. I took early retirement from this company to be able to devote myself 100% to beyond budgeting through Boxness advisory. So that's where I am today.
That's a great introduction because that gives me a lot of segues into some things that we want to talk about. So brilliant. Um, Obviously, most people listening to this will know you for beyond budgeting, and the thing that you and I are chatting about is that beyond budgeting is always seen as just the budgeting piece of it, right? And I think people miss the beyond and what that means. But the conversation we were having is it's really around business agility. Did you want to talk a little bit about that for me?
Yeah. No, I mean, we know that the name is somewhat misleading. And if you have a better one, then please let us know, but it have to be much better. Um, but yes, you are right. You know, the purpose of beyond budgeting is not necessarily to get rid of budgets. The purpose is to change traditional management. And at the core of traditional management, you find not just the budgeting process, but also the budgeting mindset. And the assumptions behind this mindset and behind traditional management in general are basically these two main assumptions. Number one, the future is predictable and plannable. And number two, you can't trust people. And those are the two assumptions that we are heavily challenging in beyond budgeting because, as you all know, it is simply not true. And but I think this budget piece is still important because take all the companies on agile transformation journeys today. They all discover at some point, and often quite late, that they will never succeed unless they also address um, again the budgeting process and the budgeting mindset. I would argue that there can be no true agile transformations without beyond budgeting. And there are many similarities in the thinking behind, but this you have to crack also this budget piece.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because part of the other conversation we're having around that, which sort of clicks into that, is really the finance and the HR mindsets
Yeah.
that apply to that, and you had some good thoughts on that.
Yeah. Now, as I mentioned, I do have also a short career in HR, and the cooperation between these two functions is close to my heart, and that cooperation is needed to create consistent and holistic performance processes. Too often in companies, HR and finance is like, cats and dogs. They talk a lot about each other, not too much with each other. And what they say is not very nice either way. And I know because I've been both places. And this is unfortunate because they both work with this topic, performance. And if they are sending different signals through the processes about the philosophy, then people get confused and these messages kind of beat each other up. So some of the best beyond budgeting cases and implementations we've seen, that is where HR and finance are working together.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because they never the twain to meet, and then you have your traditional governance as well. So you sort of end up with a 3-speed economy. And if you're trying to scale agility, and we're not going to go into scaling frameworks, but I'm just saying, if we're trying to scale agility across the organization, then you end up, if you're not very careful, you've got a very fast delivery engine that's banging against a governance model that's traditional. And then to add to that, you have the funding in the HR. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, in general, when it comes to scaling agile, and what I will say now is I'm not criticizing agile at all because I'm a big fan. But I think that some of the reason for the original success of agile has to do with its birthplace in software development, right? And I think what large companies and executives observed in these early pioneer years of agile was better projects and better outcomes and more happy people. And who can be against that? Agile, wonderful, I love it. Then you start to scale agile and it starts to have implications for executive beliefs and behaviors. And suddenly it isn't that fun anymore. I think that's one reason why some agile transformations struggle. I think another reason is that you can't kind of scale exactly the same frameworks and exactly the same labels and language that did wonders in early agile around software development and how teams work. Some executives in large organizations not familiar with rugby, they might think that Scrum is some kind of skin disease, or Slack is about laziness, or Sprint is about running faster, or kind of continuous delivery is about the more efficient assembly lines. I mean, so I think you also need a translation of the language, and this is something beyond budgeting offer, a language that these executives understand. They might not agree with everything we are saying, but at least they do understand what we talk about. So again, I'm coming back to this important point that business agility beyond budgeting is a beautiful fit because it's basically one and the same thing. But agile was not initially developed as a way of running an organization. Beyond budgeting was because we were born at that corporate level.
Yeah, I think that's part of the chink in the armor of the agile industry, if you like. So, talking about the agile industry for a moment, because it has become an agile industry, hasn't it? It's how do we make everything agile? How do we apply agile to all of those? Where the reality of it is that agility works in many ways, but there are certain facets of that you have to have that actually allow agility to do its job, and beyond budgeting tends to tackle that. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you say the agile industry, then part of my concern here is also kind of the certification circus, where I mean, when I hear about some of these frameworks where you have to be recertified every year, then I mean it smells a commercial money machine, which I think is damaging agile. And I'm often saying the same about OKRs, that if you get into a big kind of OKR certification circus, that will also create problems in that area. I'm not saying that we shouldn't make money, but I mean we have and of course certification can make sense absolutely in some cases, but we have actually said in Beyond Budgeting that we are not taking that route because we can't kind of, it's very hard for us to certify that somebody gets it and understands it, right? So we are trying to seek other revenue streams, but yeah.
Yeah, my concern around and I've voiced that before in this particular cast and many other casts, with the certification industry, the way that it's become is that, you know, I'm in my third year of doing agile and agility and working with organizations. My third decade of it, right? And for a very long time, I wouldn't even call myself an agile coach. And the reason around that is because I just see people with certification of all of a sudden they've got a piece of paper that says they can go out and work with any organization. And the reality is do great damage.
Yeah. And you know, it's you know, in the old days we used to put, and maybe we still do often, we used to put management behind everything: performance management, risk management, quality management, and so on, to make it a bit more macho. Now it's about adding agile in front of everything, right? And I think it's in a way diluting the or at least you risk diluting the ideas behind.
Yeah. So let's take that a little bit down the track now. So you have the Beyond Budgeting Institute, and I was saying to you that was reasonably new. You were informing me that it was called something previously. So you've got the Budgeting Institute. Talk to me a little bit about what the institute does.
Yeah. Well, we got this kind of three-leg structure where, yes, there is the Beyond Budgeting Institute that is kind of the newest one, and that basically it runs the whole thing, protects the ideas and the IP and so on. We have an MD for that organization. And you have the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, which is in a way the global network, and we organize conferences, and we actually have our next one coming up in Copenhagen, May 10, 11, the first physical one for a long time. And then you have the Beyond Budgeting Advisory, which are a group of people that can help companies getting started on these journeys. And we are working with a number of big companies and smaller right now, because the interest, as we can come back to, has simply exploded. So that's the and I'm the chairman of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable. I'm also a member of a 5P's core team, who is kind of sitting on top of all of these, consisting of people who have been involved in this for, some of us for more than 25 years.
Let me dig a little bit deeper on the advisory. What exactly does the advisory do? Can we go a little bit deeper into exactly what people would expect from that?
I mean, we always tell organizations that nobody can do it for you. You have to do this yourself, but we can help you getting started. We do inspirational talks for executive teams. We can provide input and guidance on design solutions, and again, coach and support. But we're always clear that, I mean, we will not go in kind of massively and do this for you. You have to be in the driver's seat yourself, and that is the way it should be. I mean, the more external support runs this, the more likely that it will fall apart afterwards, as we all know. So, but this also gives us the capacity to work with a number of large organizations, and as I indicated, we have been around since the late 90s. Actually, Beyond Budgeting was born just a few years before the Agile Manifesto was formulated. There was no contact between the two communities at the time, nothing at all, because we had very different birthplaces. One small exception, by the way, because I just saw on the Agile Alliance website, they talked about a conference called XP 2000 in Sardinia in year 2000, being they called it the first global or international Agile conference. And I was actually at Sardinia speaking about beyond budgeting at that conference. So there was a little bit of contact. But now I lost my thread here. So we were talking about, help me back again.
Helping the
yes. So the interest is really increasing, and the of course the pandemic has played a role here because the pandemic was special because we've had crisis before. If you take the finance crisis some years ago, but that crisis and other crisis, they only challenged this first assumption about behind traditional management, that the future is predictable and plannable. But the pandemic also challenged the second assumption that you can't trust people, because I think all the home office work really showed that you can't trust people. Right. So I think if there's anything good coming out of that pandemic, it was that one. And this has obviously created really a surge in the interest. Again, all these agile transformations has also created a surge. And what has happened also lately, just the last year, is that all the big consulting firms have approached us and want to cooperate in some form or shape. I think the only one not yet contacting us is McKinsey, but all the other ones they have. And we are not naive. We know that these firms, they have their agendas, but we also know that these firms have channels, contacts, muscles that we don't have. And some of them have said that, well, independent of whether you want to work with us, help us or not, we will move into beyond budgeting. And we don't want these firms to move to start to sell and promote beyond budgeting with a narrow and mechanical view of what this is. We've seen some examples of this being reduced to a mechanical rolling forecast exercise. So after a lot of discussions, we have actually decided to work with these guys to help them and their clients to understand what beyond budgeting is really about. And of course, this has given a huge push because again, they have channels that we don't have. So the last 3-4 years has been quite amazing from a beyond budgeting perspective.
I think it's a very refreshing approach because you could stand back and put the walls up, but of course then they go and do it, and effectively the brand gets damaged anyway. So I think it's that I can see why you took that approach. All right, look, I want to ask another question. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, if I'm a traditional CFO or I'm a traditional leader, why would I want to change my method to the beyond budgeting rather than stick with my tried and true method?
Because things have changed. What you have practiced and believed in for so many years, maybe there was a time when that was the right thing to do, but things have changed. Not just the world around us with all the VUCA out there, but also again people in organizations. And that traditional way of leading and managing no longer works in today's and tomorrow's business and people realities. So that's one reason for doing this. Another reason is that your competitors, many of them are starting to look at this. And I often tell companies and executives, CFOs, CEOs that this stuff, it will happen. It will happen. I don't care if it will be called beyond budgeting or business agility or whatever. That is not important, but it will happen. And in 15, 20 years, when we look back at what was mainstream management in 2022, I think we will smile, even have a laugh. just like we today smile about the days before the internet. And how long is that? It's not that long ago. And as organizations, organizations have a choice. They can choose to be early movers and get the competitive advantage out of this, or they can choose to be dragged into this as one of the last ones. And the longer you wait, the more of your competitors will be ahead of you. So I think that is a very good reason for doing this. And because it is good for performance, it defined in the right way. We've seen it over and over again, how how it improves not just financial performance, but also the attractiveness of companies. I mean, people like to work for beyond budgeting companies. So this is good in many dimensions. But of course, the question we often get, okay, that's fine, but how do we get started? So if I can spend just a few minutes on some slides, now we are kind of moving into some the finance and budget mechanics here, but this is important because we often help companies getting started by having them to ask themselves, why do we make budgets? And that might seem like a simple question, but it's a very good one because companies make budgets for 3 different reasons. And when I talk budgets here, it's not just cost and project budgets. We are talking about profit and loss budgets, sales budgets, investment budgets, cash flow budgets, so all of it. But there are 3 different reasons. One reason is target setting. Companies use budgets to set targets, financial targets, sales targets, production targets. At the same time, those budget numbers shall represent a forecast of what next year can look like in terms of financial results and cash flow. And last but not least, it is a resource allocation mechanism, handing out bags of money to the organization on costs and on investments. And it might seem very efficient to solve all 3 in one process and one set of numbers. But that is also the problem, because what happens if we move into a budget process and, and upstairs finance want to understand next year's results, cash flow. They start on the revenue side, ask responsible people here, what's your best number for next year? But everybody knows that what I'm sending upstairs will come back to me as a target for next year, maybe with a bonus attached. And that insight might do something to the level of numbers submitted. Moving to the cost side, people are asked about their best cost investment numbers for next year. But everybody knows that this is my only shot at getting access to resources for next year. And some might also remember that 20% cut from last year. And that memory and that insight might also do something to the level of numbers submitted, right? Then people start to add on to make sure that it's not all cut away. And this is something that everybody recognizes because they have experienced this in their own organization. And some smile, yes, I recognize this, but this is actually not funny. It's actually a serious problem, not just because it destroys the quality of numbers, but also because it stimulates behaviors which are borderline unethical. The lowballing, the sandbagging, the resource hoarding, and all the things that we don't want to see of behaviors. Fortunately, there is a very simple solution. We recommend organizations to separate these 3 purposes, target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, into 3 separate processes because they are different things. A target is an aspiration. It's what we want to happen, while a forecast is an expectation. It's what we think will happen, whether we like what we see or not. And resource allocation is about optimizing what is often scarce resources. And when you have separated, you can start to improve and design these in ways impossible when it was all bundled in one process and one numbers. Then you can start to set much better targets. We often recommend what we call relative targets, comparing how you're doing with others. You can get the politics out of forecasting, and you can get much more effective ways of managing cost than what traditional budgeting offers. And last but not least, you can then organize each of these three processes on a rhythm, that on a cadence that better reflect not just the individual purpose, but also the kind of business you're into. And once you have separated and start these design discussions, you are moving into bigger beyond budgeting discussions organically. Target setting, what really motivates people, resource allocation. Yeah. Do we need detailed travel budgets if we say we trust people, and so on? So I've helped lots of companies started over the years, and with the majority, this is where we started. It's very kind of budget oriented in the beginning, but that separation kind of takes you into bigger decisions in a very excuse the pun, safe and organic way. So that is a good way of getting started, and every CFO and CFO will get it and won't be scared by that.
And that's the key person usually is the CFO to start with, right?
Yes.
So. Yeah, look, that's brilliant. And look, that was a great insight. I didn't even have to ask the secondary question, so it was fantastic. So thank you. Thank you very much. It was very easy for me. Look, we're really at the end of our time, so it's been fantastic to have you on all the remote things, Bjarte. How do people get involved with the advisory, with the institute? How can they touch base with you?
Yeah. Now, check out our website, bbrt.org. Sign up for our newsletter. Then if you want, check out my own website, bogsnesadvisory.com. There is help out there if you want to get started. Come join our conferences, and the main purpose of that Beyond Budgeting Roundtable Network is to connect people so that these companies can learn from each other. So yeah, get in touch.
That's fantastic. Look, it's been fantastic to have you on. If you're listening to this, don't forget to like, subscribe, amplify, all the remote things for all the things remote. Bjarte, again, thank you for spending that time with us and giving us those insights to Beyond Budgeting.
Thank you for the invitation.